one of you watching this screen, look out. Because soon, very soon, the most horrifying monster menace ever conceived will be oozing into this theater.
Hi everyone, welcome to Wandering DMs. I'm Paul.
And I'm Dan, and on this episode of Wandering DMs, we're talking about slimes in D&D and all the related gelatinous, gooey horrors like molds and jellies and oozes, and I think that was a pudding, and even gelatinous cubes. And we'll be asking questions like, where the heck did they come from in D&D, and how fast can you run away from them? All that and more today on Wandering DMs.
Oh my goodness. Awesome. Where do you want to start, Dan?
Well, I want to say I am really, I am really intrigued by the gooey, slimy, oozy monsters in D&D because for a bunch of reasons, they seem like an incredible outlier. Like if you look at original classic D&D, they just seem like a real outlier in a lot of ways. And they really push the boundaries of the mechanics, and they bring up lots of interesting questions about how to rule on them. And it kind of underscores the horror-based aspect of original D&D. So I could think about slimy, oozy stuff all day long.
Something dawned on me when we were talking about this originally. I was focused on the green slime, but as I think about it, if I compare this to say the oak jelly or the black pudding, all of these monsters include a color, as far as I can tell, for no actual reason. There aren't other things called... There's no yellow slime or blue slime. There's no green pudding or orange pudding, right? Why does the color matter? Why does the color make it into the name of these things?
That's a good point. I think that's a really good question. I'm not entirely sure about that, actually. I think like in first edition, there's like some text. If you can modify this, you can make the black pudding white or gray if you want to, or something like that. But generally speaking, you're totally right. That's a really good point. They all have a color. It's funny. I didn't think of that about that.
Or the inverse, right? Like, why give them different names, right? You could have had green slime and black slime and yellow slime, right? But no, we have black pudding and yellow mold, and right, like every one of them. I guess mold does feel fairly different, but like slime versus pudding,
our friend Disparel BB has a good comment there on the chat. He's saying the color is so savvy adventurers can identify them readily. And right. that's a major question for me when I've been balancing them or assessing how dangerous they are. Like a major question is if I simulate a random wizard going at one of these things, does the wizard know? Does the wizard know what it is and know what spells work and what don't? Because that makes a big difference, right?
Wait, why the wizard? Why not anyone?
Well, because it's very clear. Because everybody else, like a fighter has a sword, right? That's what they have. They got weapons, and so for any particular one of these monsters, weapons either work or they don't. Classically, you don't have a choice about it. But for the spells, and that's actually one of the things that I think is interesting is that in original D&D, it highlights the very limited number of options that you have for magical attacks. And every single one of those monsters highlights, fire and cold and lightning spells, because that's it. Those are the only things in original D&D that do hit points of damage. And so a wizard might come into the fight and have a choice. Am I throwing fire? Am I throwing lightning? And whether they throw the right one makes a big difference. Whereas I think for a fighter, I need to hit it with my sword.
Is the logic that the wizard, by studying those spells, knows, oh, this spell is useful because these such creatures are susceptible to it?
Yeah, that's a great question. Would you like a random NPC? Would you think yes or would you think no?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I would say for me, like the idea of savvy adventurers knowing it. I mean, that rings true for me, but more from like the same way as, say, savvy adventurers start to understand what kind of magic items exist, right? Like even go back to the classic sample play script in BX where the characters find some boots, and one of them says, "Well, I put them on and I move around to see if I'm moving silently," or something like that. I can't remember what he tests
You're right.
for, but specifically is like, I want to test to see if these are these specific kind of magic boots. And I feel like that is more a test of player memory, right? And this came up for me specifically, actually, with the green slime in an adventure I was running, or a campaign I was running with our with our friend BJ. He was playing with a group who was not used to old school D&D and had not played very much D&D at all. So it was a party of mostly newbies, plus BJ, who's been playing forever and knows all the tropes. And so he kind of naturally fell into this character type of the grizzled old veteran who said, "Oh, be careful." And it specifically happened when Green Slime fell on the paladin who was wearing plate armor. And he went, "Oh no, that's Green Slime," right? And he immediately knew that the armor was in peril, and the adventurer as well. But like immediately like was telling them, "You got to do this. You got to scrape it off. You got to get the fire out," right? Like he was, and it was great. It was a really nice moment. It wasn't like for an out of game reason because BJ was playing a bard or a wizard or somebody who should know. It was just because BJ knew, because he's played D&D a lot.
It's such a great, those experiences are so great. And I had a very similar experience playing in a game a year or two ago with our friend Max. And one of the fellow players pushed aside like a dirty curtain, and a whole bunch of bugs jumped out on him and started burrowing into his skin. And so I instantaneously say, I throw my lantern's oil all over that player and burn him up, right? And of course it was rot grub, and if I hadn't done that, it would have been instant death. And the player involved was our good friend Steve Buckley, actually. And so the funny thing is, he rather nonchalantly took me burning his player character to pieces. Because and I think in game I have this image of the character just standing there accepting the burning oil all over his flesh, and Steve was like, "I don't know what that was, and I don't know why that was important, but if Dan said we needed to do it, we needed to do it."
That's amazing.
That's rot grub. That's a separate episode. Yeah. We're not talking about rot grub and insects.
But it is that kind of that murky mirror, right, between player knowledge and character knowledge that I love. And I think that's why the colors are important for me. And I feel like if I was playing with a larger group of players who know their stuff, like in that case with one veteran player, it's fun to throw the tropes because he can be the right guy. He can be the person who says like, "Oh, I know this," right, and be correct, and that's a fun moment. If you're playing with a group of all experienced players, then I want to start flipping it up. I want to mix and match, and I want to have black slime and green ooze and yeah, right.
I'm just thinking of all the possibilities. Right? Yeah, and you see that in the evolution of the game, right? There was clearly this back and forth about as the players become more expert and think that they know everything. That Gary and Dave would intentionally throw. This is where cursed magic items come from, is to throw these curveballs in the mix specifically to play with that interaction. Which, it depends on your play group. That has to be customized to your particular play group and your players, like you're saying. Now, let me say that. So to begin with, I maybe you might want to pull up the original D&D monster list that's got a red box around it, because the very first thing that strikes me is, these slimy monsters were in original D&D. The very first publication in 1974, they were in there pretty much at the end of the monster roster list. And when I look at that list of monsters in original D&D, almost everything in there is basically Greek mythology, or there's a different one with kind of a red box highlighting the bottom part. There you go.
Okay,
thank you so much. Mm-hmm. So this is the second page of 2 pages of the monster roster in original D&D. Basically near the end, and you've got the ochre jelly, black pudding, green slime, gray ooze, yellow mold. I seriously never occurred to me they all have a color built in. What is my problem? Now I can't get over that today.
I think we've talked about before how monsters in D&D were, that monster descriptions often featured color, right? Like you have this from like, you know, hobgoblins skin tone or blue noses, something weird like that. For folks following it at home, by the way, this is volume 2, page 4 of our OD&D text that we're looking at here. Ochre gel. And what I found really strange is not that they have colors, but just that they also have different descriptors. There are not two kinds of jellies. There are not two slimes, oozes, puddings, molds, right? There's one of each, a color and a material, let us say, which I find fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And then I want to screw with that, right?
Yep.
I guess I want to screw with it. The other reason the color thing comes up is, and I've seen this used in a lot of adventures, is for camouflage. Right? Like I've seen a lot of adventures where, say, black slime is on the surface of water where it looks dark and you can't see it, or green slime is clinging to the ceiling where otherwise there's a lot of green fungus and mold anyway, right? So I feel like that happens a lot. You know, and I don't know which came first, frankly, whether that's the monsters came first and then people started trying to hide them in their adventures, or if it was always intended that they would be kind of camouflaged.
Good question. I would kind of guess the latter. I feel like, you know, it became a trope later on of like, there's a bunch of slimy stuff here. Maybe it's green. It's not. It's fine. Right. It's kind of a bunch of mold here. Maybe that's pot. No, it's just regular mold. So I feel like that. I feel like the disguising it possibly came later. I could be wrong. But, you know, so the very first thing that just pops out at me is how much this section doesn't look like the other stuff in the list, right? Further up in the list, you've got minotaurs and centaurs and unicorns and dryads and elves and hippogriffs and stuff like that. And all that stuff is from classical mythology. You know, the first page that we're not looking at has goblins and orcs and undead and chimeras and dragons and stuff like that. So that's all right out of classic mythology and or Tolkien, right? It's almost in the order that these things appear in Tolkien. And then you've got this blob of oozy monsters that just don't look anything like that. And there's nothing else in the list like this. So initially I look at this and go, why was this important? Why was this on those guys' minds? And where did this come from? So I think I kind of gave away the story to that at the start of the episode when we played the trailer, part of the trailer to the 1958 Blob movie starring Steve McQueen in his first starring role. And a couple of months back, this last winter actually, we had on Greg Svensson, who known as the Great Svenny, who was one of the first players in Dave Arneson's Blackmore campaign. And in that episode, he told us the very first adventure, maybe the very first monster Dave Arneson threw black pudding at the very first adventurers into Blackmore. And he even went so far as to take them into a basement laundry room and act out in real time what happens when the light goes off and the black pudding attacks them. And he was jumping wires and washers and stuff like that. And then Arneson would rule on how well they escaped from the black pudding. And at the time, Greg told us that was clearly, Dave took the inspiration from the Blob movie. And that's scary. That's a big monster.
Big as in large, physically large, or just or just high power? What do you?
Both. I mean, if you take the inspiration, if you take inspiration from the trailer, it's like filling the whole doors of this theater coming out. And there is an illustration in one of the supplements. I don't have it prepared today. That the thing is just like a wave crashing over an adventure, like twice as tall as the adventure, looking it up like this in the original books. And yeah, it's one of the most powerful. The black pudding in particular is one of the toughest monsters in the original game. It has 10 hit dice, and that puts it in the top 6 toughest monsters just by hit dice alone in the original game. It's only exceeded by things like dragons and giants and elementals. And it also has the highest damage output. I think a lot of people don't realize that, but in original D&D, it actually has the highest damage output of any monster in the game. Nothing actually exceeds it in terms of dice of damage. So right out of the box, when Greg told us that that's what they confronted for the very first adventure, I'm like, wow, he was not kidding around. That was just instant death, basically, for first level adventurers.
That is hilarious.
Right?
Hilarious. Yeah.
Scary stuff.
Interesting.
And
yeah, I don't.
Go ahead.
I mean that kind of speaks to the nature of these monsters, right? As being almost more trap than monster, right? Almost more trap than monster. I want to jump to. Do you have it here? Or maybe you don't. I was looking for the original edition description of green slime, which you've got. Looks like I'll just read it. I'll just read it from my book.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, green slime in my original edition book here. I'm going to get to it quickly. I swear. Oh, it's in here.
I'm looking at it.
No,
if you wanted to read it, I'm looking at it right now.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and read it to us?
Yeah, okay, yeah. So it was page 20 of the monster book in original D&D. Green slime is a non-mobile hazard. Green slime can be killed by fire or cold, but it is not affected by lightning bolts or striking by weapons. And again, that's the 4.
I'm going to stop you there. There's more detail in it as well, but like just the fact that in the opening statement it is a non-mobile hazard, right? It doesn't move, and it's described as a hazard, not a monster. So,
good point.
It's a trap.
Good point.
It's now you encountered green slime recently in Dan plays games from the Elder Times, correct?
You're right. I did. You're right. Actually, right. It's in Pool of Radiance, as a matter of fact. And I went walking through a kind of dried up pond, and my characters were getting hammered by green slime. Now, that game massively reduced how deadly it is, because at least in original D&D, let me just read the sentence where it says what it does. So this is kind of standard evolution of D&D things. So in original D&D, the effect is it eats away wood and metal, but not stone. Green slime sticks to flesh and penetrates it in one turn, thereafter turning the flesh into green slime. So I think the best interpretation is in one turn, you are dead.
Yeah. I mean, let's see, do you have the first edition description in here? Yes, there it is.
I have it memorized because one of my... and I have it here. Because I do.
Of course you do. Okay. You have it memorized. Great. Great.
So the key...
Wait.
I'm
getting it off screen, and I'm going to look at the book, and we're going to test you. Give it to us, Dan. Tell us your memorized green slime description.
Okay, so it's largely the same, right? So it's largely the same as original D&D. So what it gets affected by is the same. It's killed by fire or cold, but not by lightning or chops. The key thing that they changed is that it's not instant death in 1 unit of time. They changed it to 1 to 4 units of time, 1 to 4 rounds. And someone could start debating the difference between turns and rounds, but in original D&D, a lot of the time they were using the word turn to mean round. So it used to be instant death. Now it's death in 1 to 4 rounds, unless you burn it or scrape it off. Did I get that right?
Close. Yeah. So what jumps out at me is here. I'll put it back up on screen. It says green slime will attach itself to living flesh, and in 1 to 4 melee rounds thereafter, turn the creature into green slime. And in parentheses, no resurrection possible. And that's that parenthetical, which is what caught my eye. Like clearly it kills you because no resurrection is possible. You're not dead. You're green slime now.
Right. So let me tell you why I remember. Let me just tell you the anecdote about why I remember that change, because I was playing a game. God, this is so embarrassing. So I was playing a game in the 5th grade, right? Mm-hmm. And during our breaks or recess or things like that. And I was using advanced D&D rules, 1st edition, these rules right here. And the party ran into some green slime, and we were in the classroom. So we're inside, actually in the classroom, got on one of the characters, and I read this, and they go, we're going to try to scrape it off. And my best reading of this is it's going to take 1 round to scrape it off. So I'm going to roll a D4 for how many rounds it takes to turn you into green slime. And if it comes up a 1, you die. Your character is eliminated. You are green slime. But if it comes up a 2 or a 3 or a 4, you get it off in time and you're safe, right? And so, and it's funny because a lot of us critique instant death rules, but I've had this kind of thing happen a couple times in my game, and nothing is ever as exciting or memorable as that moment. And so not just my players, but the whole classroom gathered around, and it's a D4, and we all know the D4 does weird things. And we pushed the desks to the side, and we had a circle of the whole class, right? And we're going to use the whole floor of the room. And I just throw one D4 up in the air, and everybody's got gasps, right? As it comes down. And it comes up a 1. And it does actually come up the 1. The character does actually die, right?
Oh no! It must have been this. Was your player like table flip and run out the room and I'm never playing with you again, Dan?
I don't think it was that bad. You know what? Yeah, it could have been. I don't think it was that bad. Again, early editions, it was fairly easy to make up a new character. I think they were fairly low level at the time, so they just made up a new character, and it wasn't that bad. But it was. I remember that moment of the D4 in the air, and the whole room was like, oh!
That's amazing.
Right, the D4 of doom.
That's great.
So that's why I remember that particular rule there pretty well.
All right, great.
So you're so interested in green slime, Paul. We saw the trailer for The Blob, which is supposedly Arneson's inspiration for black pudding. Well, where did so Gary wrote the green slime, to our understanding, original D&D. Well, where did he get that idea from? Was he just ripping off Arneson, or perhaps?
I'm so glad you asked.
Yeah,
perhaps it comes from this.
Stars, the lonely, helpless Earth. The 21st century. The world of the future.
There's flying cars. We totally have that right now.
The cold,
21st century.
strange immensity of conquered space. Growing and spreading beyond the warped imagination of the greatest human intellect. Exploding in unspeakable horror. The green slime. A cosmic nightmare that sends you into the incredible, berserk world of green slime. Green slime. Green slime.
Oh, that song! Oh, it's so good. Oh.
It's so good. I can't tell you how much I enjoy that. The song is great. The image of the burning space station collapsing is great. And you know what? Look, it seriously rocks.
Oh man!
I've been watching that like a dozen times in the last 24 hours, and I just don't get tired of that. Here's the additional thing that's going to be news to you, Paul. Right? So that's a 1968 movie by a Japanese director. I forget the name at the moment. I apologize. So I rented that on Amazon yesterday, and I started watching the Green Slime movie. Apparently, that is the subject of the first ever episode of Mystery Science Theater 3000. I haven't seen that, but apparently that's the movie that started MST3K. Apparently. And so I started watching this, this supposedly B-level schlock movie, and here's the thing: I've seen worse written movies. Right? I have seen in the last year or two $100 million Hollywood blockbusters that have less well-developed characters and backstory than the Green Slime movie. There are actually fairly reasonable character interactions and acting in this movie. Now, the special effects, right, the model work, that actually is kind of painful to look at. But I've seen worse written $100 million movies in the last year or two, frankly. So I don't know what's up with that. So I think that underscores, right? So both of these things are being inspired by, pulp sci-fi horror movies, both of which have the thing dropping out of outer space, actually. And I think that kind of underscores what a gumbo original D&D was, is they were willing to start with these mythological creatures and were willing to steal everything in sight from a lot of horror movies, comics sometimes, and these sci-fi movies. And there's, lines that support using cyborgs and robots and stuff like that. So it was very much a grab bag and very much a mix where they were willing to throw anything at the players. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Including green slime.
song is fantastic. That is an amazing
It
song.
really is. It really is.
All right, let me ask you. Let me divert us a little bit away from the origin, and let me ask you about the nature of these creatures being destroyed by specific damage types and the damage types in spells. Right. So we have lightning, fire, cold, and these monsters seem to be susceptible to one of them. How much do you think that was an intentional design of we want 3 different damage types and we want monsters, we want an array of monsters that are specifically countered by that? Is it one for one? Do we have that? Like, green slime is susceptible to fire or cold, right? But not lightning?
Correct. So
and then you have
I have an old blog post where I made a matrix of all what you're asking about. And it's not in front of me right now. But they're clearly playing with that whole matrix of you have these 4 damaging types, and we're going to have at least some monsters. It's not like every single permutation. But we're going to have some monsters that are playing on what combination of things you might have in your arsenal. And that's clearly, it's clearly targeting a player challenge about, do you know this? Do you remember this? Do you identify the color? I feel like that's clearly an intentional kind of meta-gamey playing off the mechanics that exist in the game at that point.
Interesting. So, the place where this hit home for me the most is actually in the classic board game Dungeon. So if you get out your copy of Dungeon, it has monsters here. I'm just gonna put them up here on screen. This is the green slime and the black pudding. So your monsters have different colored numbers, and the different character types attack on different numbers. That's you're rolling 2d6 trying to get above the number. Fighters get the best number. They're on red. I think cleric is on blue, and wizard is on green. But the wizard has 2 spells, fireball and lightning bolt, which have unique colors associated with them, right? So they have a limited number of these that they can toss out, and then some monsters are more or less susceptible to the different spells, but none so much as black pudding and green slime, which you can see here. And what fascinates me is that this is probably where Dungeon diverts most from the description of the monster in the book, because you can see black pudding only needs a 5 from a fireball and is totally immune to lightning bolt, which attacks on gray, whereas green slime, totally immune to fireball, and needs only a 6 or better to be destroyed by lightning.
Wacky.
Yeah. Isn't that fascinating?
Wacky.
Like, yeah.
So what colors?
Gray is for lightning bolt, and yellow is for fireball.
Huh? Really?
Yeah.
Huh. Yeah. That is backwards, isn't it?
Yeah. It's exactly correct for black pudding, right? Black pudding has as we know, like, lightning is terrible against black pudding, right? Because it splits it in half. Now you're just fighting 2 black puddings,
right?
And then whereas fire definitely destroys it. Green slime, though, for whatever reason, has been flipped, and I believe just ultimately. I would not be surprised if we had Dave McGarry here to ask if he would just say, like, yeah, well, it's for game balance reasons of I wanted a monster who was particularly susceptible to one spell and one that was particularly susceptible to another. Put these classic monsters in and run, oh no, they're both susceptible to fire and neither is susceptible to lightning, so we'll just flip one of them.
Great. Good point. I mean, that's probably what I would do there. Now, this is a slightly, this is a different version of Dungeon. The cards look different than the older version that I have. Mm-hmm. So now I want to go flip through the cards in the older version and see if it's the same thing there. But I'm not going to do that on camera because I'm going to have to throw about 100 teeny tiny little cards in the space.
Yeah, this is the my copy is like the 80s era reprint, but I would believe. I'd be surprised if it wasn't the same.
I agree. That makes sense. If those are the 2 things, I mean, you could have picked one of the other ones, but the other ones actually aren't. The thing is, the other ones are all susceptible to weapons, right? These are the 2 that aren't susceptible to weapons that you kind of need magic to attack. So I can see he was kind of boxing.
Is there a monster who is susceptible to lightning? Is there a monster where, like, lightning is the right choice?
Pretty sure. Good question.
Yeah. We'll have to go back to your blog and look up that matrix.
Gray ooze.
Gray ooze.
I want to use lightning against gray ooze. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Why?
So-
maybe gray ooze is in the pack of monsters in dungeon, and I just failed to pick it out. Or maybe just gray ooze is just not as. Yeah, gray ooze versus black pudding would be a tough sell, I think, right? Those are on these little cards, right?
Yeah,
they're gonna look almost like the same thing.
True. And again, gray ooze is susceptible to both lightning and weaponry. So, in my experience, gray ooze is not nearly as dangerous as the other stuff because everybody can just pigpile it and hit it with weapons legitimately. So you almost don't even need to, you don't need to waste a lightning bolt spell anyway because you can just have your fighters attack it.
I actually had a game once where a player who's relatively new to D&D was in a tunnel that was very narrow, so they had to go single file. So he was in front and came into a room that had a gray ooze in it, and I actually had the gray ooze kind of stick up a tendril probingly coming towards him just to give a little lead up to, oh god, there's a thing here, right? And I was kind of thinking of the movie Abyss, right? So you kind of get that amoeba-like thing coming at him, and I was just trying to give him a round of reaction time to, because he was new and never played before, being like, oh god, there's something terrifying here. But no, he instead decided to become curious, and I was like, oh, I sheath my sword and I reach out to it. I went, oh no. So then I rolled the attack, and it just destroyed him. So I basically had the gray ooze just shoot tendril right through his chest and just,
Oof.
Just impaled him right there. For the second person in a row kind of watched this amoeba ooze emerge from his back and just, eviscerate this poor character. It was quite a moment. I think we all enjoyed it quite a bit. The extra little foreshadowing there, the round of anticipatory, like, oh, what is this thing? Oh, what is this thing? Oh, no, it's horrible. It was wonderful.
I say it every week, but I mean, classic D&D is a horror story. It's a horror game.
Yeah.
And it's very explicit. If you look in the right place, it's very explicit that they're getting a lot of ideas from horror movies and horror pulp writers. And if you play by the book, you cannot escape it. Nonetheless, extra good polish on that, Paul. Good job on that scene. That I really felt that in my gut.
Yeah, that's my favorite gray ooze story right there. I feel like gray ooze is most often used as it's on the floor, on the wall, and you can't tell because it looks like stone.
I'm going to throw up a comment by Joshua Macy here just for a second. So Josh is saying, that right there is the problem with the movie The Abyss. It teaches the wrong lessons about tentacular horror. I agree with that. I really, when I was watching James Cameron's The Abyss, then a tentacle comes out, I felt that. I was like, something really horrible is going to happen. And then it's like, oh, it wants to be friends. Oh, that's not what I expected. So, one thing that you mentioned at the top, Paul, is like what category do these things fall into? And it's kind of funny because it mirrors the real world scientific debate. And obviously, I like to call all of these things together slimes, largely because, slime molds are a real world thing. So I kind of like to mentally wrap it like that. And there's real world scientific debate about exactly how you should classify slime molds. Historically, once upon a time, they were considered a type of plant or a type of fungus. And then that's changed. And so now they're put in their own group, basically called Protista. Is they kind of just don't fit in with any other living organism in the actual world. And so we have, right? And we have that same thing happening in D&D. Is originally all this stuff shows up in the monster book. And then there's a constant, there's a standard debate about, like you said, are they a monster? Are they a trap? Are they something else? And as of it was 3rd edition that moved them, green slime, the immobile type specifically, green slime and the yellow mold out of the monster book and put them not in the trap section. They had to make a brand new section just for these things called hazards, and it's green slime, it's yellow mold, maybe it's one other thing of immobile, dangerous stuff, and that's where you see it in 3rd and 4th and 5th edition now. So you got and thanks to the patrons of Wandering DMs, actually, I was hunting for them in 5th edition, couldn't find the right page. Big thanks to Ash and everybody for telling me where exactly that was. But there's a section called hazards that's basically just green slime and yellow mold. And it's really easy to overlook, and therefore it's really easy to overlook because they're this unique thing now.
Fascinating. But things like, say, the gelatinous cube don't end up in there because that's clearly a monster?
Yeah, the mobile things
mobile?
they all keep in the monster manual. Yeah, and since 3rd edition, they've they've called those oozes, right? So you look in the monster manual under oozes in 3rd, 4th, 5th edition, you're going to see all that other stuff that moves around. One, aspect of that, right? So the other thing that almost all these slimy types do is they destroy equipment, right? So they're doing damage by acid type things, right? And if they hit you or you hit them, they have a tendency to eat objects that are metal. So they quite frequently will wipe out your armor or your weapons. And certainly for classic D&D, the magic items are the primary way that you built up your character to a large degree. So having your carefully crafted set of armor and weapon just melt off you in 1 or 2 rounds was really hideous. And for example, like in 1st edition, the Black Pudding, it says it hits you, and if you have chainmail, that's gone in 1 round. If you have plate mail, it's gone in 2 rounds. But you get an extra round for each plus of magic bonus. So if you have +1 plate mail, it's going to take 3 rounds for it to melt off you. And that was basically kept in 1st, 2nd, 3rd edition. And one thing I noticed in 5th edition is that it no longer works against magic stuff at all.
Huh.
So in
totally
5th edition,
Interesting.
Yeah. So in 5th edition, the Black Pudding says, it will destroy your armor, but as long as it's non-magical. So your magic armor, totally safe as of 5th edition. Which to me, again, as an old schooler, I had to kind of do a double take with that, because like a large part of these monsters was the horror of like it. They almost, like Black Pudding in particular, is just a total fighter negator. Right, the fighter can't hit it. Weapons don't work against it. It destroys your equipment. It destroys your armor. So it's very much an FU to all the fighters in your party, and you've got to push the wizard up front to do something about it.
Yeah,
and it also
you have other monsters like that too, right? Like my brain immediately goes to the rust monster, right? Where like rust monster shows up and suddenly all the warriors are terrified because they don't want to lose their equipment. Right. Interesting.
So I went, and about 9 months ago or so, I have this simulator that I use for original D&D that runs combats automatically and tries to spit out numbers for how dangerous stuff is and things like that. And I went and I'd held off on adding the slime types for quite some time. And I went, now I'm going to go implement this, because these, particularly because they were immune to weapons, so they just didn't fit into the whole I hit you, you hit me system that was up before that. So I had to add wizards and I had to add magic spells in order to even begin to assess what Black Pudding or green slime would do or something like that. And what a pain in the ass! Just what a huge it turned into just a huge problem with all the exceptional things about the slimy monsters, and coding them up and implementing them were like a nightmare. And just conceptually, you run into all these problems, at least in the original game, of how incredibly sketchy it was. Like, let me just read the part of the Black Pudding description of original D&D. Right? It says, Black puddings dissolve wood, corrode metal at a reasonably fast rate, have no effect on stone, and cause 3 dice of damage to exposed flesh, which again is the highest damage in the whole game. If an armored character runs through a Black Pudding, the monster's corrosive power will eat away the foot and leg protection of the armor so that it will fall away the next turn. I'm like, what do I do with that? I'm like, does it stick on you? Does it affect anything other than the foot protection? What if you have magic foot protection? How fast are you running? What if you stand in it?
Is Black Pudding mobile in that edition? It is, right?
It is. Right? It is. Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting. Because I feel like that's the thing that jumps out to me about these monsters is, and there are edge cases here, but the thing that jumps out to me about these things is that usually they're like we said, they're a hazard, right? And the idea being that if you can identify it from a distance, there is no need to go anywhere near it, right? Or that you're going to find some other way around it, which seems to me very key to classic D&D, right? Like we hear a lot of stories of classic D&D played where players have to face monsters that are way above their pay grade, or even all the way back to the first game ever of Blackmoor that you were mentioning, where they encounter a black pudding, right? Because the idea wasn't that we expect the adventurers to kill everything they encounter, right? We have this notion that most XP is probably coming from finding treasure, and one way I like to summarize this to folks who've never played classic D&D is like, think about The Hobbit. The goal wasn't to kill the dragon; the goal was to steal its treasure, right? So the goal of the game is to get the treasure, if possible, without having to face the horrors. So that description really speaks to that for me, right? The idea that like, oh, well, here's a room, we need to get to the other side, there's a black pudding in the middle, let's just run. We'll just run right through it. We not fight it, just go. And then there's your answer of like, well, okay, you can do that, but it destroys your like armor.
I can see that. It does leave me with questions about like, does it do damage when it's doing that, or does it stick to you, or does it do damage later? And when I was going to implement it, I wound up asking like a whole like embarrassing ton of survey questions on different sites actually. So I'd go on Facebook has a big first edition group, the original D&D forums, and I would ask surveys in these places because I was trying to dial in, my system as close to people's expectations. And the problem is on these issues, it's sketchy enough that there's lots of room for judgment, and people can go in all kinds of different directions with this legitimately. And for a lot of stuff, there's barely any consensus at all. Maybe I'll throw out a couple of questions that I had to ask and see how you would go with it, Paul, or maybe our viewers. If one of the ooze monsters hits you, should it stick to you and do damage automatically later, or should it not?
That is an interesting question. I'm assuming that we're not talking about the like, does it continue to corrode your armor? I would certainly assume you're in your full plate armor, you walk under a doorway, green slime falls on you, it's corroding your armor. I'm not rolling to see if it sticks. It definitely sticks to your armor. So let's assume you're unarmored, green slime falls on you, presumably has to make an attack roll or something. There's some roll there involved to see, like, does it land squarely on you, or do you, like, roll out of the way or something? I would certainly give a die roll there. So round 2, I guess I would expect it to stick. I would expect it to stick and auto do damage unless you're starting to do something about that.
That's what I would expect too. It's our chat's going by, so it's Desparrow who's pointing out that original D&D green slime does say it sticks to flesh. The other ones don't. So, and I think Moldve BX specifically says that all that stuff sticks to you, but it doesn't say that for anything else in classic D&D. So I think a lot of people vote no on that, actually. Unless it says specifically it doesn't stick.
When I go back to how I've ruled gray ooze before, usually I don't have gray ooze adhering to you. I have it instead. It says, in fact, in the description, I think that it strikes like a snake, right? So I'm assuming gray ooze turns into these pseudopods that actually like lash out at you. And maybe they're acidic and maybe they're burning, but they're not like dropping and adhering to you. Rather, they're striking you. And in which case, I would not expect it to continue to hit you. Now, what about black pudding? I don't know, especially because I feel like the classic presentation of black pudding is that it's sitting on top of water. I don't know why I have that expectation, but like maybe I've just read too many adventures that found it clever to like at the bottom of this well or in this underground lake. Ha ha ha! There's a black pudding on the surface. Which, is great because the players took off their armor to jump in, presumably.
Right. Right. Now, I will say, I kind of accidentally discovered that about the worst thing you can possibly do as in D&D is to put black pudding in water. Like, particularly if you have an underwater adventure and there's black pudding, because the only thing that it's killed by is fire. So you put black pudding underwater, I don't know what you can do about it. That's a tough
Run
day.
away. Run away. Which I think is, frankly, is for me, that's usually the answer to most of these monsters. Now, there's a very clever use of yellow mold in Dyson's Delve, right, where you have a treasure room that is covered in yellow mold, right? And it's funny because I remember actually, I remember you playing with it, and like I think you guys spent a fair amount of time trying to figure out what the hell to do about that. Because the assumption is, well, we know there's treasure under that mold, but is the treasure susceptible to fire? And if we light this room on fire, what's going to happen? Do we get a mound of molten gold? Do we get gold pieces? Do we get valuable scrolls that have been burnt to a crisp?
Exactly. That really sticks out at me as one of the more scary encounters in there.
It's a fun one too, because I think there are hints about it. There are messages, because basically the monsters are in possession of this thing, and they also want the treasure, but they're like, it's got this stupid yellow mold on it. What do we do about it?
Yep. That makes sense.
Yeah,
that makes sense. Yeah. Another thing. Okay, I got 2 other questions I'm going to quiz you about here, Paul. So, so most of these things destroy. It says they destroy equipment, right? So, how do you assess whether it hit the equipment, right? So, among the options that occur to me are like, does it just do a normal hit roll and have like plate mail actually protects you from that hit, or does it do a hit roll as if you were unarmored to try to hit your armor? Or does it hit the armor like if it misses? How would you figure out whether the armor's been hit?
I have always ruled it that that a hit means it's hit your armor and it's starting to corrode it. I've never changed. I guess I've always assumed your armor still gives you the protective value. Like I didn't change it to be like a roll to hit AC's, unarmored AC. But just assumed that if it does hit you, that it's hit your armor and it's starting to corrode it. And likewise, the inverse of if you hit it with your weapon, well, now it's on your weapon and it's corroding your weapon.
Great. And those are things that we have to make judgments about in classic D&D. I will say that what Paul just said is the consensus opinion. Apparently, I must have thought about it too much, because this is one of these things that really surprised me when I found that was the consensus opinion. But most people, most original AD&D players say exactly what just Paul said, is just normal hit roll hits the armor.
I could see the logic of like, is that how you've ruled it? Is that you roll against unarmored roll?
That's what I used to do, but I've switched to match yourself and other players, so I'm not surprising people too much.
Yeah.
I do the same now. Yeah,
interesting.
And then the third thing that was problematic when I went to assess things is they very carefully each of these monsters name the 4 damaging things in original D&D: weapons, fire, cold, lightning. But what about the spells that don't do damage? Right? What about a death spell, or disintegrate, or charm monster, or what about confusion?
Isn't there a specific note about one of them being destroyed by cure disease? Isn't that in there?
I think in first edition that's added.
Yeah. Okay.
No, it's in the original D&D. So yeah, green slime is destroyed by cure disease. Right, that's always been there. Good point.
Fascinating to me that green slime is a disease, but okay, sure.
Yeah, right. I don't know. Is it a trap? Is it a monster? Is it a fungus? Is it a disease? For God's sake, nobody knows what it is. It's green slime! Oh, no. It's an alien horror from beyond the world. So anyway, I find that most people think like a death spell or disintegrate should work, and most everybody agrees that confusion and fear should not work. And then the other stuff is kind of in the middle.
Yeah, I could see that. Yeah, I would generally think of it as something that's mindless, so any mind-affecting things like confusion and fear I wouldn't expect to work.
It certainly makes sense.
Death and disintegrate, yeah, that makes sense to me. Yeah.
So I think that's what
I
put my simulator that way, yeah.
I wouldn't fault anyone for saying no, because there is a specific note about, like, it is only affected by these spells and no other magic. Right, so I could see taking that fairly dogmatically and saying, like, well, it says no other magic, so disintegrate, sorry, doesn't work.
Absolutely. Right? Absolutely. And then you come in, and of course, magic missile didn't exist in the initial publication of original D&D. So one of the one of the short circuits is when they brought in Magic Missile in the first supplement. That doesn't have a damage type, so it's not fire or cold or lightning, or I don't know. It's debatable whether it's a weapon actually. So most people, and in the current rules now, what is it, force damage most recently? So that gets around all of these resistances that the slime monsters traditionally have.
Yeah, I've been sifting through my dungeon cards here, looking to see if there was any gray oozes. There's not, but I did find an ochre jelly.
Really?
Oh, I don't know if you can see this. Maybe I'll hold it back. Come on, camera, work with me. Anyway,
stuck in all the light.
Ochre jelly. Yeah. Ochre jelly is apparently very susceptible to fireball and totally immune to lightning. For what that's worth.
Fascinating. Yeah.
Ochre.
Maybe pull up. So having done my assessment for original D&D, maybe pull up the thing that you accidentally picked up at the start of the show that has the final result, the final tallies from my system to measure what I call equivalent hit dice. It's a little small on screen. Yeah, I apologize. So this is OED. So this is the these are the stats in OED. I'm trying to read original D&D as close as I can. And these are the key statistics. There's that column EHD for equivalent hit dice, which my program spits out, which is basically equivalent to challenge rating, frankly. I apologize if that offends anybody. But you can see, most of them aren't that dangerous. The EHD level is either 2 or 3 or 4 for most of them. Particularly anything you can hit with weapons isn't going to be that dangerous. And then at the top, just completely busting the graph off the top is black pudding with you can call it a challenge rating of 13, which means it's equivalent to a 13 hit dice monster, a 13 level character basically. And that is, I can see why people are running out of the theater in the Blob movie, because it's got among the highest hit dice, it's got among the highest damage in the game. And it even has you asked about whether it moves. It actually has the fastest movement of any of the slimes. Actually, it's as fast as a character in plate mail. So a character in plate mail cannot outrun black pudding. It's really scary, and it's immune to absolutely everything except for fire, and it destroys all your equipment. Ha! And we didn't even talk about the fact that if you hit it, now you have 2.
Which is my favorite thing. I definitely I've had that moment in a game where players accidentally turn 1 black pudding into 2 black puddings, and they're just like, no. Now that's a turning point of like, we are done fighting this thing. Right.
Now in like 5th edition rules, right? It's very clear that you split it, and they both have half as many hit dice as you started off with. In original D&D, it doesn't say that. It just says that it splits into more. How have
you ruled that? Do they have the same hit points as? Are they full hit points? Do they have the same hit points as it had in the moment it got split? Does it have half the hit points at the moment it got split?
I'm going to leave that a mystery from my players. So the next time, that one I'm not going to state publicly. It's happened. It's happened at some of our games at our HelgaCon. Actually, I think at the last HelgaCon there was a black pudding that did get split up. So it's happened, but I'm not going to say public. So I'm going to let the players discover which way I go with that.
Okay. Dan, amazingly, this time it's me that has not been paying attention to the clock, and it looks like we're out of time.
Oh.
Do you have any final thoughts on puddings, oozes, or green slime?
Well, I mean, there's some of my most memorable events, honestly. My green slime story, things with the black pudding are actually weirdly some of the most memorable things. The yellow mold was probably the scariest thing for me in Dyson's Delve, and a lot of these things have instant death effects, right? They totally come at you sideways from normal D&D mechanics. They're at risk of destroying your armor and your magic gear. They are possibly entirely immune to all of your standard fighter tactics. And they frequently have instant death effects. So yellow mold can kill you instantly. Green slime can kill you instantly. Black pudding has enough damage to do it. And, that's been largely massaged out of the game but I would recommend that people just try, if you haven't ever done it, just try a game once where you have instant death effects like that on the line, and you're rolling dice in the open, like my fifth grade story, and see if that doesn't change the drama and the excitement level at your table. I will point out that Paul has a great video about setting up a dice cam for online play, and it's gotten some really great comments on YouTube. And then I saw someone on Twitter the other day. I don't think they understood what the point was, because they were like, "Oh, this is someone who clearly just doesn't trust their players. That's why they're doing this." And you got to respect people's perspectives. But I was like, the point of this is to share the excitement. Of the dice coming up live, right? And to have all of us react at the same time, because in my experience, there's no greater excitement than a single die roll where death is on the line. So you should, it's not for everybody. You should try it and just see what it's like, because it's a trip.
I agree. I agree with that, absolutely. And that doesn't apply to just slimes and oozes and jellies. I think that's anytime there's any kind of poison death save, it's great stuff. I'm sorry, viewers who are commenting about our lack of coverage of the gelatinous cube. I'll make a quick shout out to the fact that yours truly contributed to a book of gelatinous cube variants available on DM's Guild called the Cubonomicon. So if you want more gelatinous cube content, check that out.
Thanks, Paul. Thank you. We didn't get to gelatinous cubes. Yeah. I mean, it came up in a supplement, so I guess maybe it wasn't on my mind. I apologize. I love gelatinous cubes.
We must have done an episode on this. We must have done an episode on this when that book came out, right? I got to go back to the archives and look. We already talked about cubes. We must have talked about gelatinous cubes.
Did we? They're great.
They're so great. Keep up. Those wandering DMs make so much great content. It's hard to keep track of it all. Anyway, viewers, if you have more thoughts on oozes, slimes, jellies, slime molds, holy cow, go look up the Wikipedia article on slime molds. That's weird stuff. But if you have any thoughts on using that stuff in your D&D game, please leave a comment here in the YouTube comment section. We would love to hear from you. And maybe we'll talk. Maybe we'll have to devote an entire episode to gelatinous cubes if we haven't done so already. Maybe we have. We'll figure it out. But leave us a comment. Maybe that will spurn additional conversations in the future.
And remember that you can like and follow and subscribe to us. And we're on YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, Facebook, GitHub, TikTok, a whole bunch of places. We have to handle wandering DMs on all those sites. So look for us there, and you'll get updates on future shows about gelatinous cubes and other stuff.
If you prefer to listen to the show in audio-only podcast format, you can do so. Those podcasts are available on our website at wanderingdms.com. Also through various third-party podcast carriers such as Google Podcast, iTunes, Spotify. If you're listening to the show right now on one of those sites and they offer the ability to do so, please rate and review our show on that site. That helps other users of that site find our show, and we really appreciate it.
Yeah, and of course, thanks to our patrons who support the Wandering DM show. And if you'd like to join them, please do visit patreon.com/wanderingdms. You'll see our different tiers, access on merch, behind the scenes stuff we're trying to do, and after party chat that we do every single Sunday. So we'll be there on our Discord server to continue the conversation live in about 10 minutes. And it's one of the favorite parts of our week, frankly. So we'll look forward to seeing people there. And you're in the chat today, Paul, right?
Yep, I'll be there.
Awesome.
I think you're taking on. Join us.
Yes, please do. And Paul, I think, will be wandering off the show next week. So our plan is, unless I have my dates wrong, my plan is I'll be interviewing artist Alyssa Fadden, who does a lot of map making work for a lot of our favorite products, actually. So I'll be interested in getting a chance to talk to cartographer Alyssa Fadden next week. And don't forget other shows on the channel. Actually, I am moving my Elder Times gaming stream to Monday nights. So actually tomorrow night at 11 Eastern time, I'll be back with more Pool of Radiance, attempting to dodge the green slime and other horrors in that game. I have a three-peat going. I haven't had a TPK in 3 weeks. Uh-huh.
Sounds like
so
you
join
did.
in and watch. Damn it. and look for other shows that we're playing and hopefully having on in the fall here too. So look forward to that. So don't forget, we are live every Sunday at 1 p.m. Eastern time. So please join us next week for another thought-provoking discussion.
We'll see you.